It's quite all right.
Well, I
So,
was, in fact, I am, the main thing, you have to know is I am from Córdoba in Argentina. I practice as Cordobesa. I kept my legal residence there in order to vote in Córdoba forever. Although I have been living in Buenos Aires for a long time, and I am working globally, so I'm moving from one place to other. I am a lawyer. I studied in Córdoba, and then I did my PhD in Madrid in the Complutense University. I worked there on the general principles of law. And when democracy came back in Argentina, I came back to Argentina to be the director of legislative initiatives of the Córdoba governor. Then moved to Buenos Aires to organize the first presidential election in 1989, and keep on working on institutional matters, political finance. Then I worked at the Congress in both chambers for many years in the constitutional committees. And then I devoted my whole activity to consultancy and NGOs. And in that field, I was first a member of the TI, Transparency International Board, for 6 years. And then I was elected as the chair of the institution for 2 mandates till the end of last year. So that's the way I have been going around.
okay, well, that's really great because the whole thing with NGOs is most interesting, most interesting. But today we're here to talk about corruption. It's on everybody's mind, I think. It's we see it, we read about it, we sense it all around us. It seems to be able to flourish because people are too busy trying to make a living to give it a lot of attention. So it flourishes in the darkness, so to speak. And I was talking earlier to our people that are working with us for this particular presentation. We were talking about the concept of fuzzy thinking and fuzzy actions. You know, it's the whole concept of corruption, because it does appear in it's either in the dark or in the gray, meaning it's not really transparent. You're not sure what's happening. It's built around fuzzy speaking, meaning there's no real solidity to what people are saying, but yet it's attractive. It's somehow attractive, and it appeals to seems to appeal to the most negative sides of our nature in terms of avarice and those things. So tell me what your experience has been over the last in fighting corruption, and where you see the fight going from here forward, because there's because of this wave of change in government around the world, the election of populists, the election of new authoritarian figures who seem to want to stay forever in office.
And we have been talking about this for several times now, and you have been working on anti-corruption as I have. I think that after 40 years of working in the field, we can say that we have achieved certain objectives, and we have made progress in terms of regulation, conventions, putting the topic on the agenda, and that's the positive side. But corruption is also changing every day, and it has become much more sophisticated than the bribery issues that we faced 30 years ago in countries. It has become transborder, mixed with illicit financial flows, anti-money laundering, or money laundering, and the efforts to stop that type of crime. There are also new actors in the field which present new challenges. For instance, the organized crime involvement in corruption schemes and politics present problems in order to tackle this kind of activity, which is not the same as tackling the corruption that appears in business sector, in the legal economy, to say in some way. So I think we have to move from rules to real action and effective action to have impact in what we are trying to do, because rules are necessary but not enough, as we both know. So I think there's a lot to do in order to keep the fight against corruption updated with the development of the criminal activity, which is corruption around the world. And of course, this change from country to country, from context to context. And as you were mentioning, we will have time to talk about that probably. State capture is a new problem. Some authoritarian regimes have introduced what many people call geopolitical corruption, which is the use of corruption as a foreign policy tool from these countries, the authoritarian regimes. So the complete scenario is full of challenges and risks. And of course, we have the technology helping us in the fight against corruption, but also facilitating corruption in other fields. So really a very interesting and concerning scenario.
So if we look I'm going to look at the United States for a few moments. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who was complaining about a new type of criminality and creating a corruption in the United States, dealing with a certain immigrant group. And my experience in reading the history and in living it to some degree is that every immigrant group, as it struggles for its place, brings with it a certain level of criminality, not in the group, but individuals within the group. And they create corruption of their own. And this goes back. So the United States, probably the most famous, I think actually it's not the most famous case, but I think it's a very disgraceful case. When the United States expanded westward and wanted to occupy the continent, there were already people there, been there for thousands of years. And so in the interests of grabbing the wealth of the continent, they committed a genocide. The government of the United States had committed a genocide effectively by infecting people with infected blankets and other things in such a way that they died off because they didn't have antibodies to those diseases. And if we look now and we bring everything forward and we bring it to today and we think about how it's presented, you see movies like John Wick. So in the Wick universe, there's this giant corrupt organization that corrupts the whole world. And it's made up of organized criminals and organized groups from different countries. And they have this commission or high table. In this case, it's all led from somehow out of the desert somewhere in the Middle East, but the high table somewhere in Italy, of all places. It's a very interesting thing, but the idea is the same thing. It's that people are corrupted by their own avarice, by their own greed. It seems to be human nature. And I participated years ago in helping to prosecute these things when I was with a government agency. And we had judges who went to prison for accepting bribes and so on. But at the end, it all just kept going. It all just kept going. Today, we are hoping that the guardrails that we've established through our constitutional order in the United States are not going to be disassembled and destroyed by anyone in administration, because our Supreme Court just decided that a president in office can do anything he wants as long as he says he's carrying out the mission of the presidency, and he's completely immune to prosecution for anything, literally anything, as long as he can somehow find some tenuous way to tie it to his job as the president. And in other countries, we see the same things. We see it in Russia with extrajudicial killings. And the whole purpose of it seems to be to commit national and international level, in terms of quantity and size, economic crime. And I think that it's all revolves around this desire for economic crime and the power that comes from it. Since we spoke the other day, I was thinking about this very deeply. I think that and I don't think anybody knows how to get to overcome this human tendency to fall victim to our own basis natures, and because they somehow revolve around the instinct for survival. But we have the issues. We have corruption that leads to human trafficking. We have corruption that leads to narcotics. We have corruption that leads to frauds of different kinds. And I would, in my mind, and we discussed yesterday things like, or Monday, exchanges of information internationally between governments. We discussed how scandal can be an impediment to corruption. Just before we came on, we discussed the scandal that occurred in a group. You talked about the four I's, the letter I, which we can discuss today. And so tell me how these four I's are working, and how you're using them, because that was really interesting. The concept of integrity. So it started out with integrity. I got stuck on integrity, but you seem to
you are right. You are right. We are talking about what I call the formula for anti-corruption, which is the formula of the four I's, the letter I. And I think that there are four things we have to work on. We need more integrity, more information, less impunity, and less indifference. And particularly in terms of integrity, which I think it is at the core of the problem. As you say, Stanley, the problem of corruption has to do with human nature. Although I have a slightly more positive approach to this.
I'm actually not negative about it. I'm not feeling negative. I just recognize what it is. It's human nature.
Yeah, I agree. But I think there is always the possibility to say no, apart from the greed and the tendency to do certain things in order to get power, because power is also at this equation. But I think integrity is at the core of the problem. And of course, you cannot guarantee integrity just by passing laws, because integrity is a much more complex issue, apart from legality or what is legal in a country or what the laws prescribe. So we have to work on that. And we were talking about the importance of education, not at the university or the business school, but education from home and the kindergarten and on, in order to really create a culture of corruption, of integrity or transparency in a country where corruption is systemic. That's very important, but very difficult to achieve. The second I is information. I think you mentioned that corruption appears or is more easy is easier in context of secrecy, opaqueness,
darkness,
lack of transparency.
Oscuridad.
Yeah. So if we have more access to information in general from the public and from also the authorities in charge of enforcing law, that will be much more efficient in terms of detecting and preventing corruption, and of course sanctioning once you have the information. And this international sharing of information is one of the key issues that we have to approach, because the procedures that we have in many of these corrupt cases or corruption cases are really created in the 19th century, not even the 20th century. And we are facing a problem with money flows that goes absolutely quickly from one place to another, from one account to another, from one shell company to another, at the click of the cellular, the mobile phone. So we have to adapt that regulations and procedures. Information, of course, can help in the investigation and the prosecution of the cases. Less impunity, the third I, is central, because when you have impunity, coming back to human nature, you have the temptation, or the temptation is higher to engage in this kind of criminal activities. Nobody will suffer consequences. Nothing happens.
So
All
would
people
you
are
like to
doing the same.
so Delia, can we define impunity as being above the law?
I sure would agree with that. It's the lack
Okay.
of consequences, of legal consequence for what you are doing. And it goes to the fourth I too, because when the population keeps on voting corrupt people, this tolerance to corruption is another incentive. I was mentioning in our conversation yesterday that in Argentina, for instance, the average duration of a process against corruption is 20 years. You can imagine 20 years to get to the end of a procedure and sanctioning someone. I had when I was at the university teaching governance, there was a sentence, a decision by a court, very important, of something that has happened 20 years before. My students were 22, 25. They didn't know the case. They know nothing about the person that has been sanctioned. I had to explain everything. So the deterrent effect of convicting was absolutely absent. Nobody knows, nobody takes care. So
I
this
don't know. I don't
impunity.
know. I don't know if I completely agree with it. The deterrent effect wasn't there. There was another, I'm just thinking about it from a slightly different angle. The fact that somebody could finally be convicted 20 years later, even if, maybe they committed their crimes when they were in their 20s or 30s, and now they're in their 50s or 60s, and they're thinking they're free. And all of a sudden they're in prison
Yeah.
because memories are long. And the memory of government or of prosecutors is longer. And we saw that after World War II with the continued prosecutions of the Nazi war crimes and so on, and other things. So it sort of wakes people up. So I think it probably woke up your class to the realization that maybe no matter what I think I'm getting away with, I might not get away with it at the end
No,
of
that's
the day, as the kids
of
would
course,
say.
you are right. But the effect is weaker than when you have timely conviction. And one thing that
Yeah, I think that there's something to that.
Yeah, and one thing that is happening, particularly in the global South, I would say, and in Latin America, and it is clear. Once we have moved ahead and forward in the fight against corruption, and during car wash issue across 11 countries in Latin America and 2 in Africa with the same scheme of corruption. Once in many countries, presidents and important business people and business leaders has been convicted, asset has been recovered, etc. What we are seeing now 10 years afterwards, is that these convictions has been nullified, that the evidence provided in confession. So they say, yes, we have paid this to this political actor in order to get the contract or get the privilege or whatever. Once this evidence has been used in order to convict people or to prosecute people, what, for instance, the Supreme Court in Brazil has said is this evidence is null and void. And this had affected not only the results of the cases in Brazil, but in all other 11 countries. So this moving forward and then backwards in the fight against corruption is one of the problems we are seeing. And this creates, again, the sense that you can get rid of the law, you can be above the law, which is really, really very concerning, particularly with powerful people or politicians, as you have been mentioning, and the Supreme Court decision caused lots of concerns in many countries, because the effect of that thinking can affect also
Well,
other.
there's some thinking that it's happened in the United States because because of impunity, of the acceptance of what appears to be bribes from very wealthy people by Supreme Court justices, because they're not bound by a code of ethics like other judges are. They don't have a code of ethics. They don't have guardrails that have consequences attached to them. You know, it's sort of like there's a reason why why people can keep certain wild animals, so-called wild animals from the forest, from going into farmland, because you have an electric fence around it or whatever. They get shocked, they jump back. It's operant conditioning, but at the end of the day, I think it applies to people to at some level. When we create impunity, then we're left with scandal as a guardrail. And scandal is good, but if the scandal results in no actual consequences, then the scandal was just a scandal. It was great theater. It was sort of like the movie The Wizard of Oz, where the wizard's behind a curtain moving all these mechanisms, but the wizard is saying, "Don't look over here at my curtain, look over there somewhere else," which is the effect of what I want you to see. We do
I
that a
agree.
lot. We do that a lot.
I agree. Consequence, the scandals are important to awareness raising, to put the topic at the priority of the agenda, the public agenda for a moment, but consequences don't come out of the scandal.
No, they don't. They don't necessarily come out. And people have short memories, not they have short memories, that they need to move on with their lives. The public needs to move on with its life. It doesn't want to be continually bombarded with these things, because I want to pay for my kids' school, and I want to buy groceries, and I want to go on a nice trip with my wife, and I don't want to hear all of this negativity.
Yeah,
So,
and in countries with systemic corruption, what happened with all these scandals, that one follows the other in a continuum, generates a kind of disengagement from society.
right, I agree.
Not only for what you are saying, I have to take care of my personal things, but also the sensation that it is impossible to do anything here. So don't care. Everybody is the same, and everybody is doing the same, and people become disappointed, and of course they lack trust in institutions, in gatekeepers, in everything, and even in law, which creates another circle of being above the law, or wanted or the wish to be also above the law. If the wealthiest or the politicians can go without consequences, why not me? And that kind of culture is very negative in
Well,
terms of
when we look
integrity.
at organizations and we look at reasons for employee dishonesty,
Mhm,
one of the major, in the studies that have been done, and this is all around corruption. It's all about corruption, but now at a smaller level, at the micro level.
mhm.
Most of the employees have said, well, I saw my boss doing this, which I know to be improper. So I said, why not me? Why can't I do it?
Yeah.
Why should I be held to a different standard than my boss? There's a country, one of the countries in Central America, two of the countries in Central America have actually moved more towards providing for consequences. Not that often, but they happen. In one country, they put a president, an ex-president in jail. They convicted him for stealing funds from their national social security funds. Because he was stealing, I guess, with impunity, the feeling of impunity. In another country, it was the son of the president who was stealing. So there is some movement, but like you said, it's one step, two steps forward and one step back, or maybe one step forward and two steps back. I think that authoritarianism plays a big role in corruption. I think I think there's different amounts or different feelings of authoritarianism. I think there's a hard authoritarianism that one might see in Russia or in China or in countries such like that. And then there's a softer one. It's more like a spider web. Things just seem to happen. People get hurt, but it's not a big deal. Nobody makes a big deal about it because, as you said, we don't feel we can do anything about it. And I think that's even more dangerous because in the case of hard authoritarianism, we saw in the case of at the end of World War II what happened to Mussolini in Italy, and we saw in other countries what has happened to other dictators after the people were fed up with hard authoritarianism. But soft authoritarianism is much more dangerous because people just don't pay that much attention to it because after all, there's nothing I can do about it and it's not directly affecting me.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
corruption has a lot of edges to it and in a lot of cases there's no edges. It's sort of fuzzy. It's fuzzy thinking. It's fuzzy conditions. Can't seem to wrap my arms around it. I don't know why it's happening. But there's an old expression in the anti-fraud world, which is if you want to know what's going on in the world, just follow the money. And that applies, I think, to corruption as much or more than anything else. Just if you can follow the money, you can follow what happened with the corruption and why
Yeah,
it's
and
occurring.
there are many initiatives that try to make this principle, follow the money, a reality in the fight against corruption. For instance, the recent effort to have public accessible beneficial ownership registers
Yes.
goes in that direction to really facilitate the knowledge of who is behind the company and who is really managing the decisions or taking the decisions, or where does the money come from when we talk about campaign finance, for instance. And all these kind of measures, also those who protect whistleblowers, that try to make it transparent or to give information about a corrupt deal. All these are measures that we as a society are putting in place in order to facilitate the following the money. But there are other technological tools or tech tools that facilitate the anonymity or complicates the follow the money issue, like the use of cryptocurrencies. In my region, in Latin America, organized crime is particularly resorting to cryptocurrencies to move their assets and to conduct their illegal business, I would say. So that's important. But you mentioned an example of an algorithm that can destroy
Yes, I
this.
did. But not just an algorithm, some other things that have occurred. So I'll come to the algorithm in a minute, but there was a big case of ransomware.
Mhm.
Ransomware is not cryptocurrency, but it's been a big problem for corruption because that money that's gained from the ransomware is then used to corrupt other individuals and corrupt governments and do other crimes. So there was a big ransomware attack of a major network of businesses and hospitals and power companies all at the same time, and it was the what ended up happening was in a short period of time after the money was paid to the extortionists, they got the money back. And the reason was banks in other parts of the world, see, and by the way, it was paid with, this is where I'm going to, it was paid with cryptocurrency. So I want everybody to understand that cryptocurrency is not truly cryptocurrency. It is pseudo anonymous. Remember that the distributed ledger on which transactions occur can never be altered and can never be erased. As far technologically, we don't have the ability to do that today as we sit here. So that means it can be followed. So they followed this money into Europe into certain banks, and those banks turned around and grabbed all the money and gave it back. Now, because in order for the cryptocurrency to be utilized, it has to be converted to fiat currency because it's not in and of itself a true currency, because it's not emitted by a government and in control of central banks. So in some countries, they're using it for a medium of exchange, like El Salvador has made a law that says you have to accept Bitcoin, but really you're making a bet on value. It's more like a casino bet.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's
you're
one of the
right.
few countries where it actually is a medium of exchange. So when I was at the anti-corruption conference a couple of years ago in Mexico City, um, I had the opportunity to speak with the embassy an embassy officer of the United States government who happened to be an Internal Revenue Service um, criminal investigation officer. So he was a policeman, federal policeman with a badge and a gun, essentially. And his job was to look for crime with cryptocurrency. That's what he was looking for. And at the same time, there was an FBI agent in the U.S. Embassy, had the same, they've all had diplomatic credentials. They all work together. They have all converged, all law enforcement. And so what happened was um, they developed an algorithm that allows them now to read the distributed ledgers. So they are able now, they love cases involving cryptocurrency because they don't have to have witnesses. They don't have to do anything other than produce the distributed ledger, which shows exactly what happened to the money, who received the money, what they did with the money, and there's nothing else that they need to prosecute a case because it's indelible. It can't be erased. It's impossible under today's technology to change it.
Yeah. When you are in the chain,
You're in
you
the
are
chain.
you have access to everything, and as you say, nobody can individually modify one
No.
point because that would
All they
destroy
can keep doing is
the rest.
moving it along, but it's eventually it has a stopping point.
Mhm.
There has to
Well,
be some stopping points along the way. And what people don't understand about it is in and of itself, it has no particular value. It's not as if it's gold bullion. It's not as if it's silver. It's not as if it's diamonds with an intrinsic value of its own or some other use other than for example, gold is used in certain industries. You can't involving electronics, involving nuclear projects. The same thing applies to diamonds, that its use in industry. But you can't say that about cryptocurrency, because what is it? It's a math algorithm, and it then uses that same math algorithm to produce a picture of itself, and it's called a Bitcoin, or it's called something else. It has no intrinsic value.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I get tempted because I see the markets moving up and down, and maybe I want to gamble, but I've never gambled in that marketplace.
But coming to the algorithm, it shows that technology can help to detect corruption and follow the money.
Well,
At
well,
the
of course
same
it can.
time, at the
If
same
you have the
time,
will, if they have the will to do it and use it, somebody has
yeah,
to have the will to do it.
yeah,
And once again, I mean, how did the American mafia, Cosa Nostra, exist for as many years as it existed and make as much money as it made without corruption? It couldn't.
of
It
course.
just couldn't. And the same thing would apply to any other organized crime group of people anywhere in the world, except in countries where the government is the criminal.
Yeah, and if I may, coming back to your imitation example of what employees says in companies, and that's
Yes.
corruption. Corruption is not only happening in the public sphere; it's also happening in a company, of course. And I think that is a very interesting example when you talk with a business in the business sector about compliance. I think compliance in the last years as a discipline and as a part of the governance structure in companies have moved from just legal compliance to integrity. And one important topic is, or one
We
challenge
have a question. We have a
companies.
question. Somebody named Liana Oemati, I'm assuming that's how I pronounce it. If I've mispronounced it wrong, please forgive me. What is it doing with the reputation when you have these scandals? I'm going to give you an example, Liana. After the um, the scandal with from Panama, with the Panama Papers came out, a lot of people were named, and there was a particular attorney named in a country in Central America who was very prominent, and he had to change his entire way of doing business with his international clients. And he claimed that he wasn't doing anything, and yet his fingerprints were all over all of these structures that were created through the particular law firm in Panama that was creating them. So that although he wasn't from that country, he was using their services on behalf of his clients. So there was sort of a cutout, another level, but his name came up, and it came up very strongly. He had to publish in local papers all over Central America denials. He was publishing denials, one after the other, that he had nothing to do with any of this. He didn't know what they were doing, but in fact, he had to know. Something called willful blindness, and his entire law firm changed the way in which they did business and stopped using these companies in the country of Panama for forming these specific types of structures. So it had an effect. Now, did his law firm lose any business? No, but but not initially. But certainly, they weren't as sought after for these structures as they were before, because they weren't going to do these structures, because all of a sudden it came out into the open, and it was an embarrassment for him, for his family, for his country, for his country, because he was the former head of their own internal IRS in his country at one point. So here he was promoting tax evasion internationally. And he got caught with his fingers, as we would say in the United States, in the cookie jar, eating the cookies or the fruits of the crime. So, so yes, it can have an effect. It can have a big effect, and it's not just in this particular area. I mean, it can affect a lot of things. scandal has this effect of sometimes affecting generations of people. It can really be, it can affect your children. It can affect their children. How are they looked at? Um, we tend to blame the sins of the parents on the children, as a species. So yes, it has an effect. I think it has a very, very powerful effect, but not forever. Remember,
Yeah.
societies have short memories. Eventually,
and
it comes
and
back
not
around.
and not in all cases. And of course, that happened also with the reputation not only of persons, individuals, but also companies. And then they come back in business, and probably have to change not only the way in which they are working, but also the brands they are using, or the name they are using, or things like that. In the family companies, for instance, this is very usual. Um, what I think is that these consequences or these effects of scandals go sometimes beyond the reputational damage and of those involved, and you have important changes in the regulation or the creation of gay guardrails, as you say before, Stanley. For instance, the Watergate case had lots of effect in terms of how to regulate the money and politics relationship. But that was many years ago. And what happened with this kind of situations is that with the pass of years, uh, the new loopholes are detected, or new ways to not abiding with the law are used by corrupt actors, and things keep on going. So, for instance, in terms of money and politics, there is a never-ending story of scandals, regulation, new scandals, modification of the regulation, and this keeps on going
Well,
because
we
you
are we
have
are a resourceful species after all, aren't we? I
yeah,
think we are very
absolutely,
resourceful,
coming
and,
back
and
to
it continues.
human nature,
I
coming back to human nature.
it's all human nature, and so for those that want to figure out how to control corruption, um, you mentioned it starts at home. Uh, you know, simple things like what are the consequences for telling a lie to your parents? You know, what are the what are the consequences of stealing candy from somebody or whatever it is? I mean, there are consequences, and
I told you an example of a 9-year-old schoolboy in India
right,
who told us in an investigation with Transparency International that, yes, he was very frank and open. In order to get a good grade, I have to bring the teacher a prepaid telephone card. It was the time when you have to dial all the numbers before
right, right.
conversation. And he was absolutely clear that in order to get a good grade, he had to ask the father and mother to give the prepaid card in order for him to give it to the teacher. Imagine the kind of culture you are creating with that kind of example, because the children are learning from what they see. The example in integrity education is absolutely key. They
But
see how
you're bringing
grown
something
up.
else up. You're bringing
Yeah.
something else up, which is interesting, and that is you have I said this chasm between these two parts. You have the corruption at the highest levels from the wealthiest people that are corrupting people around them. Perhaps, perhaps not, but when it happens, it happens. You have the corrupt government, and then you have the folks that are just trying to survive.
Mhm.
And the question is the relationship, in my mind, where does corruption begin to diminish, or where can it help to be diminished as a result of lifting people up economically? You know, if people can't eat, they don't really care what the rules say. They just want to eat.
Mhm.
And so I'll give you an example, which is I'm going to come back to my country now. I live in a country which has over 800 million guns. Okay, and it's a country of 365 million people. It's 800 million guns in the hands of the public. According to the latest statistic I read, 70% of all the people don't have handguns, don't have arms. Okay, they don't have firearms. So, so if we just leave it at small numbers, 300 million, we'll cut out the other 65 million people. Just say there's 300 million people, and so 210 million of them don't have guns. That means 90 million people have 800 million guns. And if those 90 million people cannot eat and cannot feed their families, or they're finding it too difficult, what might they do with those guns? So where does poverty come into this? Where does the ability to survive and live decently with our families come into controlling corruption daily? I wonder if you can talk about that.
Well, many things. I remember as you were talking an anecdote in Africa where a very important minister told me the chair of Transparency International there. Well, Delia, cultures are cultures, and in my country, when we assume office, public office, we say that it is our time to eat.
There you go.
That's a very strong statement. And of course, I don't think that because you have no money, you will be involved in corruption. The problem is that when you have such necessities as
Yes.
the physical necessities, you don't have enough time to think about corruption or whatever. It's a matter of priorities. But moving this to, for instance, a very often argument saying, okay, if you put the wages or make the wages higher, you will stop corruption. I think that's the wrong argument, particularly because I have seen in practice in many countries, public salaries have gone up in order to prevent corruption, and they have not prevented anything. On the contrary. So I think the relation of corruption with poverty, in my mind, has to do with the fact that the money that is lost to corruption is the money that is missing in welfare, in appropriate infrastructure, in healthcare, in the possibility of a future for a person. And that's why when you compare, for instance, the indexes, transparency index of corruption or any other measurement of corruption with the indexes that has to do with the social situation in a country, you see the correlation. I'm not talking about causation. I'm talking about correlation. These kind of maps that we usually see depicting the situation of a country, the situation of democracy, the situation of checks and balances or freedom of press or any other condition, correlates with corruption or transparency in those countries. It's corruption is, as a human issue, as you say, very much related with many other issues. And when you have corruption, the possibilities of you personally to have a future, to work, to be free, to move and to improve are lower than when you live in a free country where checks and balances operates,
Okay.
where there are guardrails and gatekeepers are gatekeepers and not enablers of corruption, no?
Okay, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. To those that are still on the line, and apparently we have 41 people sitting out there listening to us, we're open to questions. I answered one question a little earlier, but if anybody others has any questions, this has been a wide-ranging conversation. It wasn't designed to necessarily provide you with a pedantic way of handling a problem. This was more designed to explain that human nature being what it is and the conditions in countries being what they are, the corruption
And
that
to share our concerns as,
right,
as
right
anti-corruption
is
fighters.
exactly. It's not clear. Like Delia just spoke about, well, we have correlation, but not causation, because correlation doesn't necessarily indicate causation. It's these are trends, statistical trends that occur, which says that, well, when this is going on, this seems to be happening, but we don't know why either one of them is happening necessarily. So
Mhm.
it's more difficult than what it's a more difficult problem to solve and may never be fully solvable just simply because it's handled by people.
Mhm.
Um, and we might get some
But
benefit
that,
from, go
for
ahead.
instance, that is important when you are in the business sector and people wants to create a culture of integrity in the company, so they
Yeah.
pass lots of codes of ethics, and every employee has to sign the copy of the code of ethics. But then you ask what the code of ethics says about this or that, and there's nobody answering the
Well,
question.
you know
Or
what
you,
this is like? You know what this is like? You buy something that has a warranty. Or,
yeah,
or you order something over the internet and you have to check yes if you want to buy it. Nobody reads it because it was written by lawyers like yourself. It was written by lawyers, and it wasn't written to help the people that are checking the box. It was written to help the company that's selling the product.
and because it's a human problem, that it is the reason why it's so important to have the appropriate training in terms of integrity.
I think
And
that's true. I think that's true.
you
And
have to
that and
people have,
the word Delia is appropriate. We're coming to the end of this thing in about 7 minutes. So if you can tell me what you think is appropriate training, I think the audience would love to hear that because you used a very important term, appropriate.
I think it has to be connected with the business in the particular cases, or if you are talking in a school, connected to the context. It has to do with real cases, real dilemmas. I think the use of dilemmas in the trainings is much more important than talking about the rules. You have to present the dilemma and try to facilitate the thinking tools and the critical attitude from people in order to detect conflicts of interest, to be aware of something happening. Some time ago, I went to give a lecture and I was offered, as part of Transparency International, and I was offered a wonderful present. It was amazing. And I immediately told the people, I have to give this to the organization because I cannot accept presents or gifts. And I talked with another NGO person that was attending and receiving the same thing. And she told me, but Delia, what have you done? You have to keep the present. The present is for you. And I think, okay, she's not aware that this is a conflict of interest and this can create a misleading situation. And it was an anti-corruption NGO also. So you have to be aware to detect the problems and to really think about before acting.
Of
And
course.
that's the training, the appropriate training.
I think that's a good way of talking about it. Um, Another way to think about it is as part of the training is to emphasize the consequences of crossing a line.
Mhm.
And I think that if you know, I remember growing up, if I lied to my father, or either of my brothers and I lied to my father, we always felt our lives might be forfeited. You know, it was pretty strict. So we weren't good at that. And
No, of course, in the training, you have to highlight that imitation is not the way, because that's the problem in many companies and in many governments, also in many societies. Okay, it's my time to eat, as I mentioned.
right. I've seen that in other countries, by the way. I was heard that from a country in the Caribbean, actually, that occurred in. You know, a new presidency. It was almost the exact same words. It's my time to eat. So it's my turn to get the benefits, to drink the water, whatever. I'm going to let you go. It's 11:57 a.m. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. I've seen we've had one. We have a few chats, but none of them relating to the subject. But at least we've kept our audience, which is really nice to see. And I'm hoping we can do something a little more concrete down the road. I'm very interested in what your Transparency International is doing and how effective it's being, because of course I look around me and I see what's in the newspapers like everybody else does, or I see on the news feeds and in the social media what's going on. So I'm hoping that you have this wonderful salubrious effect on the world, and that things will improve. I don't know when they're going to improve.
It is a collective action endeavor. We have all to contribute in the fight against corruption, because we are the victims of corruption after all.
Of course we are. Well, that's a great statement to end on. We are all victims of the corruption that's occurring, and therefore we all should take part in fighting it. With that,
thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Me too. I think it was great. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for everything. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and hopefully I'll see you in Bogota one of these days again.
Yes. Bye-bye. Have a nice time.
Bye-bye.